Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune and Merry Christmas to all of you. Yes, it's Christmas, and on a day that we celebrate joy and the best that humanity has to offer, let's take a look at the worst that they had to offer in 2017. That's right, today we are counting down the top 10 worst albums of the year. And unlike last year, where I didn't even have enough contenders to fill out a full top 10 list, this year I actually had to narrow down my top 10 picks, and boy was that difficult. Keep in mind, this is the worst of the worst, meaning I really did have to think hard about what would end up here. And because of that, there are some albums that you may have expected to make this list, but didn't. To give just a few examples, there will be no Chainsmokers, no Hollywood Undead, and no Chris Brown. That is a bad sign if ever there was one. So let's just dive in, starting with a real gem. I debated whether or not I should even put this album on this list because I really do love it. Out of all the albums here, I can easily say I had the most fun with this one. And even if I'm looking at all the albums I reviewed in 2017 as a whole, this one still stands out as one of the most enjoyable. But even with all that said, it's still unbelievably bad. The writing is terrible, the compositions are all over the place, and Pat Monahan's voice is just ridiculous. From the heart and soul inspired Play That Song, to the stilted and awkward cadence on Lottery, to the absolute horrific gem The News, which is quite possibly the worst and yet somehow best thing the Train has ever done. So yeah, if you're in the mood for an album that qualifies as so bad it's good, then I highly recommend you check this out. But it's number 10 for a reason, because it can only go downhill from here. You know, there's a part of me that really feels this album doesn't belong here. In many ways, I could see someone liking or defending this album out of the ones that are on this list. But at the same time, this was just such a huge disappointment for me. Demi just sounds awful on the majority of this album, and frequently I just burst out laughing at how melodramatic it can be. The gospel touches only take away from the album's overall quality, and the music in general is just terribly mixed. Add to that the fact that it's a complete regression from her last project, Confident, having her act all meek and needing these people, which she really can't sell well. And you have easily one of the worst albums of the year, as well as one of the biggest regressions that I heard in 2017. But somehow still not the biggest disappointment we got this year.
White boy, you're a rock star. White boy, in your cop car.
Look, it may be a late entry, but it's also a well-deserved one. Eminem has had bad production and bad bars on previous albums, but my god, at least you got the impression on those albums that he knew what he was making was of lesser quality. Here, the album opens up with him talking about what a god he is, and then he proceeds to deliver bars upon bars that are cringeworthy with absolutely no sense of self-awareness. Add to that the quality that is at an all-time low, and the complete lack of decent songs, not to mention the guests that range from okay to utterly awful looking at UX ambassadors, and you have by far one of the biggest letdowns of Shady's career. It might not be his worst album, but it definitely wasn't the revival we were all promised.
I've been down so long it look like up to me. They look up to me. I got fake people showing fake love to me, straight up to my face.
You know, the more I thought about this album, the more it soured on me. Last year Drake made my worst albums list with Views, and even though that project is still terrible, it at least had some passion and effort put into it. Here, you don't get either of those, it's just an easy, quick cash-in. And it's honestly galling just how much Drake doesn't care on this project. So much so that the best songs here are from other artists. Which is another thing, calling this a playlist really does feel like an excuse not to put out your A material on a project. instead being able to put out whatever the hell you want because you know it'll sell. Skepta and Sampha really are too good for this project, and considering Drake is nowhere near their individual songs, I'm going to give all the credit there straight to them. Because Drake doesn't put in absolutely any effort here, and when he does step up to the plate, all we get are mediocre bars, terrible production, and a performance that could best be summed up as a sleep. Easily one of the most boring and sour projects that I had to revisit for this list.
Rep the set, gotta rep the set, chase a chick, never chase a bitch, mask on, fuck it, mask on.
Oh my god. You know, when I reviewed this back at the beginning of this year, I genuinely thought it would be top 3 material. But no, here we are, only at number 6, and I already find myself baffled that this is so low. Look, I've never been a fan of Future, but on his past projects you could at least point to some bars here or there that worked, or maybe a guest feature that worked. But on this album, there are no features. It's just about an hour of Future being Future all on his own with no support. And it works about as well as you'd expect, with terrible production, Future's awful voice, and so many bad and questionable lines that it hurt me. And on top of that, it's boring as fuck. And considering this was the album where Future was meant to prove to us that he couldn't be replaced by someone like, say, Designer, it really was a tiresome listen. But hey, at least it's easy to tune out, right? There are worse things, like being noticeably incompetent.
Play with that pussy like peekaboo, 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 play with that money like peekaboo.
You know, the fact that this is only at number 5 really does speak volumes to just how bad some of the albums were this year. On this album, Lil Yachty pretty much let down everyone, as he gave all of his haters even more ammunition to take him down with, and also simultaneously let down all of his fans that were there for his fun, upbeat music, as he tried to trade all of it in for mainstream success, going for terrible production, ripping off other artists like Migos, and tons of terrible lines, including "She blow my dick like a cello" and all those lines about incest. Not to mention an entire song that is called X-Men, which has nothing to do with Marvel and has absolutely hellish production that will give you a headache. The only reason this isn't higher on this list is that there are 1 or 2 songs that do redeem it, which is more than I can say for, say,
I'm a golden god, I'm on the roof of the party. Still almost famous, still one away dangerous.
You know, this might not be the worst album of the year, but it is by far the dullest. Here, Machine Gun Kelly clearly proves why he is one of the most lazy bargain bin MCs working today. And yes, while his hit with Camila Cabello, Bad Things, is admittedly awful, it's by no means the worst song here. He can do far worse. Like, say, those moments where he compares himself to David Bowie. Go fuck yourself! And even aside from that, the production on every single one of these songs ranges from boring to utterly awful. Even on the 1 or 2 decent tracks, they're only good for a hook here or there. But yeah, this is bottom of the barrel material, and last year it probably would have topped my list for the worst albums of the year. But no, because in 2017, boy oh boy did we get worse.
And what's wrong?
You know, I don't think that me placing this album at this spot is going to satisfy anyone. The people who love AJR are just going to be angry that the band is here at all, and the majority of people out there, namely the ones who hate them, are going to be asking me why the hell it's so low on this list. Honestly, like I said in my review, while it is clearly incompetent and terrible, there are moments that do kind of stand out as okay to me. I do actually find the bass compositions here and there actually promising. And even the lyrical ideas in some of these songs do have some promise, but the problem across the board is the execution. This is an album that is so clearly trying to copy what other popular acts are doing that it really is galling, and it does it so terribly that I don't think anyone can fully appreciate it. If your favorite band is AJR, or if this really is your favorite album of this year, then you have no taste, plain and simple. Either that, or you really haven't listened to enough music. So may I suggest that you go listen to to a 21 Pilots album or something from Jon Bellion. Because trust me, you'll get exactly the same thing with way more substance, way more charisma, and way more competency. Easily one of the biggest train wrecks of the year, and for many people, the worst album of 2017. But not quite for me. This was by far the biggest disappointment of this year, and I wasn't even expecting much. Even though I gave Eminem a lot of well-deserved flack for Revival, at least it was confident in what it was doing. At least I can believe that Eminem thought he was making something revolutionary. But this album has such a galling lack of effort to it that it really is insulting. Macklemore parted ways with Ryan Lewis to release this project, and it really does show because the production here is fucking awful. Absolutely all of it sounds ripped off from other artists doing it better. And speaking of which, Offset appears on this album to deliver easily one of the worst songs you will hear all year with Willy Wonka. Although I'll give him credit, it's not like anyone else here remotely impressed me. The only one who's trying here, and the only one who elevated this above a 0 out of 10 was Kesha. But otherwise, every single performer here, including Macklemore, was barely trying and was basically on autopilot. Believe me, the only reason this didn't top the list was Macklemore's natural charisma and talent. And while, believe me, none of that charisma comes through, the talent at least shines through in brief moments. But no, while many of you probably thought this was going to top this list, when going back to re-listen to every single album that was a contender here, there was one that stood out as the worst of the year, and at this point, you probably all guessed it. You know, technically, there were worse albums released this year. You saw a few of them on this list. But if I'm thinking of the absolute worst that hip-hop had to offer in 2017, if I'm thinking of the most insulting material on an album that I've heard this decade, then Painting Pictures by Kodak Black is by far one of the worst things I have ever heard. This album does actually have okay production here and there. There are actually some guests that are trying, unlike on Gemini, but unfortunately, all of that is nullified and drowned out by the terrible human being that is Kodak Black. And no, I'm not talking about the allegations here. Whether or not he actually beats women or assaults reporters or rapes people, that's beside the point, believe it or not. No, the problem is that on this album, Kodak Black is trying to excuse every terrible thing he's ever done on race. And look, that's definitely an issue. Systemic racism in the United States is something that needs to be addressed. But not by this guy. This guy who has absolutely no discernible talent. This guy who built his entire career off of controversy. This fucking kid who deserves to be lynched as far as I'm concerned, does not have the right to be saying these kinds of things, especially when there are people out there who actually are suffering from systemic racism. Real victims who he's taking attention away from in order to build up his own fan base and popularity. This album may not be the worst of the year on a technical level, but in terms of what angered me the most, in terms of what I want to revisit least of all, in terms of what I want everyone to avoid and give absolutely no attention to, this album is far and away the worst album I heard in 2017. So yeah, there you have it. Painting Pictures by Kodak Black. That's the worst of the worst. And if you disagree with me, if you're a fan of Kodak Black, if you want to defend his music, then I'm not gonna say this often, but you may as well go ahead and unsubscribe. Because trust me, I don't want someone like you watching my reviews. So yeah, those were the top 10 worst albums of 2017. I hope that you guys all have a Merry Christmas, and again, if you like Kodak Black or support him, go fuck yourself. But for the rest of you, please leave a like if you enjoyed, and let me know what you thought of this list as well as your own top 10 picks down in those comments below. Luckily, that's the last of the real negativity out of the way, so next we'll be focusing on the top 50 songs of the year overall, and then finally the best albums of 2017. So please subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Merry Christmas to all, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is the Social Tunes signing off.